What commanders should you pair together as a brand new player in Rise of Kingdoms? Well, today I'm going to help you build your first 3 armies, and you can trust my guidance because I have been playing this game for like 2,500 days. I've maxed the overwhelming majority of the commanders in this game, and I've even pulled down something like 36 billion kill points for what it's worth. So in the early game, all right, there's a couple things you need to know about that a brand new player wouldn't know. The first thing you need to know is that you're going to gain access eventually to this thing called the State Forum and the armament system. In this system, you will open up crates and do quests and travel to get these armaments, which are basically stat slot machines. When you open it up, you're going to get some number of random stats for different troop types, for attack, defense, health, and you don't control what they're going to be. I mention that because you're going to want an army for each troop type, because eventually you'll get really good armaments for cavalry, really good armaments for infantry, and really good armaments for archers, even really good armaments for siege. And so you'll want to have an army of each troop type so that when you get to the end game, you can make sets like this that take advantage of all of the different troop types and all of the different stats that you can get. So now that we've established that you're going to want an army of every troop type, including siege at some point down the road, what are the first 3 armies that you should build? Because obviously you're not going to have access to all these commanders. You're going to be starting with a very small number of commanders. And if you're following my early game guidance, the very first commander that you will get a disproportionate amount of is going to be Sun Tzu, because you're going to start the game with China. Now, if you didn't start the game with China, you're going to be fine. And by the way, if you're getting value from this video so far, consider throwing a like on here and subscribing to the channel. You can always use the timestamps to jump to whichever part of the vid you like, and subscribers often do exactly that. So because you're starting with China and you're getting a bunch of extra sculptures of Sun Tzu, you're going to want to build a Sun Tzu infantry army. Now, as it turns out, he also is probably one of the best early game epic commanders that you could have gotten to begin with. So that's just a win. So what does Sun Tzu even do? He does big area of effect damage, and he does damage over time, a small amount of extra damage, I suppose, for 1 extra second to those enemies, and he also generates rage. This is a pretty big deal. He also enhances damage dealt. He also goes in and gives you damage taken reduction and infantry health, which is amazing. Damage taken reduction and damage dealt increase is always better than the equivalent amount of stats. So this is honestly pretty dang powerful for the early game. So who do you pair him with? Well, the thing is that although I could pick out lots of different epic commanders that you could go work on, the reality is that you're going to want to focus your investments. A huge mistake that players make in the early game is they invest in everything or spread around the upgrade materials and things they have instead of focusing. My goal here is to get you to focus. This means we need a blend of legendary and epic commander choices. My recommendation is that once you get either Charles Martel or Pyrrhus, that your goal should be to pair with them. Now, obviously, you're going to need to get some amount of sculptures, ideally maxing the first skill before you proceed, because that skill is better than any of the other skills. You can do that using a system called Skill Lock, which I can't show you on that commander because I haven't maxed, but I can show you over here, right? You go in, you take the slider, you lock it for the first skill. All upgrades will go in on the first skill, so you can unlock the other skills, but have all your investments still go into the first one, which you want. First skill is always one of the most, if not the most, powerful skill on a commander, all right? And the reason that you're pairing with either Pyrrhus or Charles Martel, depending on who you get, is not that either of those commanders is actually going to be viable in the end game. It's that they're going to be pretty darn strong in the early game, good enough to use and tide you over until you get to the sort of mid-ish game, which is going to be KVK Season 3, Kingdom versus Kingdom. You don't need to know what that is right now, but that's what the sort of end game cycle is going to be, is these Kingdom versus Kingdoms. You're going to need something to tide you over. I think Charles Martel, who you're going to get from Gold Keys, or Pyrrhus, who you're going to get from Gold Keys, is a great way to go. All right. Charles Martel gives you a big shield and increases your damage dealt. Then Sun Tzu does a lot of damage. Pretty straightforward why that pairing would work, right? The reason that I prefer Pyrrhus is that although Charles Martel is great for defending your city, Pyrrhus is a better fielder. In fact, not only is that obvious because Charles Martel has a skill dedicated to defending a city, but also there's better synergy here. Deals 1,400 damage factor, and you enhance your normal attack damage dealt for the next 3 seconds. This is on the active skill and the most important skill. Well, Sun Tzu enhances skill damage. Seems like a sweet combination, don't you think? All right, seems like a sweet combination. He does a bunch of other powerful effects as well, including shielding and damage and march speed. They pair well together, all right? So your ideal world is going to be Pyrrhus with Sun Tzu for your infantry army. We lock that up, baby, and we're good to go. And by the way, if you want talents, don't worry, I've got your back. I'll give you what the talent builds should look like later in the video. Again, you can use the timestamps if you want to jump around. The other thing that's really cool about doing both Sun Tzu and Pyrrhus is that you could take your Sun Tzu, for example, talent him for city defense, because only the talents of the primary commander apply. And you can use him as the primary commander for defending your city. I actually don't have a talent build on him right now for that, which is kind of funny. But we could cook one up really quickly here, I suppose. Depending on whether or not you're worried about your city getting swarmed, you'll choose probably something that looks like this. If you do not think your city will get swarmed, you'd go over here. I really like doing extra damage to calves, right? Like something like this, depending again on whether or not you think your city is getting swarmed, will end up being your build. Let's assume we'll move all in on not getting swarmed. All right, something like this works for defending your city, okay? A lot of nuance to Sun Tzu talent builds. I have covered this extensively in other videos. I'll have a card up in the top or in the end screen if you want some detailed talents for him. I said I would do talents at the end, but apparently I'm just getting sidetracked. So let's just do talents while we're here. Okay, Pyrrhus has the infantry versatility and defense tree. For open field, I'll tell you exactly what I would do, and I'm going to show that to you on a commander that has the same talent trees, all right? So most of the same talent trees. We're just going to use infantry and defense. I have maxed so many commanders, by the way. I joke about being commander blind. Commander blindness is a real condition affecting real players. Okay, so if I were to make an open field build using the infantry and defense trees, this is a really solid one. It moves all in, all the way up to elite soldiers. You're getting strong of body for the extra health, extra march speed because that is always in style, march speed over here because it is always in style, including some really nice defense when you star up, some rage generation, damage taken reduction, and skill damage mitigation. This is the open field build I would probably run on Pyrrhus, all right? And I say probably because there are a few tweaks you could make. In the end game, people consider getting rid of elite soldiers. You have so much stat inflation that other things like balance become more favorable. And so there is a world in which you could shed some of the points on the upper right portion of this tree over here and deploy those into the defense tree instead if you wanted, all right? So there's your infantry march. We got it locked up. We're good to go. Now what do we do? Well, I got great news for you, right? We started this by basing our direction off of something you were definitely going to do. Pick China to start. The other thing you're definitely going to do is work on E-Song. Oh my God, I can't believe this many years later that YSG is still one of the most goated commanders in the game. It is crazy. He will show up on the Wheel of Fortune. You're going to want to save gems for at minimum the unlock, and more likely, this is where you dump a bunch of gems to get a bunch of sculptures and speed ups and other things you need. With that said, he is actually viable in the end game. And if you're subscribed to my channel, you know that I made a legendary commander investment order. In the current state of the end game, you're going to take E-Song and you're going to pair him with the most powerful commander the game has ever produced, and that is QSH. And it is the most busted commander they have ever put in the game. And you will be ready to capitalize on that by maxing your E-Song, or at least working on your E-Song early. Now, if you're wondering, like, okay, so Chisgule, like, what makes E-Song so good? He does big area of effect damage, and when you expertise him, that damage is dealt in a circle. That is really versatile. You hit targets that are even behind you. Also, he generates rage and gains attack. He is designed for defending your city, which you can use him for, and he enhances skill damage by 50%, which is really busted. So yeah, you're going to build around getting Isong, but what do you do until you get Isong, and who do you pair him with? Well, in my estimation, you have two legendary commander choices. Both come from gold keys. One is El Cid, the other is Thutmose. My recommendation would be Thutmose as the stronger of the two, and you use Thutmose as the primary commander when you're in the open field, which means the talents of Thutmose will apply when you're in the field. Why am I recommending Thutmose? Well, Thutmose does area of effect damage, 1000 factor. He also reduces healing of those targets, however, by 30%. And healing is pretty major in the early game in Rise of Kingdoms. You'll get attack and march speed outside of territory. You do extra damage. You get archer defense when you launch basic attacks. You have a chance to increase your skill damage, which is obviously a big deal. And to be clear, this is technically the skill damage your current target takes. This is a debuff on your enemy, making it so that everybody hitting the same thing will do more damage. And also, you take less counterattack, which is fine. And when you're hit with basic attacks, so when an enemy directly targets you, you have a 10% chance to deal extra damage, 700 factor to the attacker. It makes you very prickly, all right? And especially if you're a spender and you have a big stat advantage, this goes out of control, man, all right? You also take 5% less damage from enemy infantry, and when you use an active skill, you get a 30% bonus to normal damage. If you're not familiar with normal damage is, let me explain. This includes your basic attack and your counter attack. That's what's relevant for this army anyways. It also includes smite and combo, but don't worry about that for now. That comes later, and at the time of this recording, that's not a thing that archers do, okay? So a basic attack is when you directly target an enemy, you do damage to them. I believe it's the equivalent of 200 damage factor, and you do that every second. And also counterattacks work the same way. I believe they're equivalent of 200 factor. It might be 100. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it doesn't really matter. You don't really need to know it. The point is that for every enemy hitting you, normal attack damage boosts also is boosting your counterattack. So a normal damage boost enhances basics and counters. So that's what that 30% bonus to normal damage represents. Now, you're probably looking at this going, but Chisgule, I still don't have Isong. What am I doing? Ideally, you're going to use Hermann as your choice. Hermann I like for a number of reasons. First of all, he's got a skill that will silence your enemy. That means they cannot use their active skills for 2 seconds, which is very powerful, and he's going to reduce their rage. This is brutal. The way that rage works is that your rage bar goes to 1,000, and you'll see the little dots go up next to your army when it's fighting, and then your rage resets back to 0, and on the next turn, you use your active skill. Okay, well, in the turn that you reset back to 0, you use your active skill. Okay, but it's after you get over 1,000 rage. And the funny thing about rage reductions is that you gain all your rage. Then the game has a cap of 220 rage in any one turn. Then you have rage reductions. Rage reductions are very powerful. This is a topic of an entire video, so I won't go more in depth than that for now. But if you look up Chisgule rage, you'll find a ton of videos explaining it way in depth, which is a powerful thing for you to know. But troop damage dealt here is 1,150 damage factor on the active skill. You get some march speed, which is so powerful. Okay, he has a garrison skill, fine. Not what it's there for. And you have another chance to gain rage over here, 10% chance to gain 100 rage yourself, which is huge. So I think Hermann is the no-brainer pick here. Now, there is something else you can do that is very cool. Okay, and it's an alternative to the Thutmose plan, depending on how you're approaching this. El Cid is a very cool combination with Hermann in the early game, and you could use Isong primary, El Cid secondary, and that is an outstanding pairing. So you can set up for that if you want by going Hermann with El Cid. Why would you do this? So Hermann does a 2-second silence, and El Cid does a 1-second disarm. They cannot launch basic attacks or use active skills. So if you use Hermann as the primary, let me explain to you what will happen to your enemies. You're going to use your active skill, okay, which is going to apply the silence debuff. On the next turn, your first second of silence will apply. On the next turn, El Cid will use his active skill, and the second, okay, that is your silence effect, will have its final second apply to the enemy. So your target's still silenced. And on the next turn, the disarm effect from El Cid will apply. So you'll have yet another turn, 3 in a row, where the enemy cannot use active skills. I recommended that combo a long time ago. It's a part of the reason a bunch of new players subscribed to my channel back in the day. If you haven't already subscribed, I genuinely do hope you will smash that subscribe button for the most watched guides in Rise of Kingdoms. Yeah. Anyways. So, that is an amazing pair you can run. I'm not recommending that you throw a bunch of gold heads into Thutmose, a bunch of gold heads into El Cid. I'm not recommending that you put a bunch of gold heads into Pyrrhus or even to Charles Martel. My hope is that you're getting them from gold keys and you're working on them over time. But if you needed to max like the first skill to tide yourself over and have something relevant so you can fight, like I also think that is an understandable, reasonable choice to actually enjoy the early game rather than hoard like a lunatic, which is probably the route I would go, and save literally every sculpture until you get to the end game. It all depends on how much you are spending and how aggressively you're pushing for early game control of the map, control of your kingdom, etc., right? So you have so many options here with archers. The 4 commanders of relevance, again, are Hermann Prime, or I guess Hermann. Prime is the endgame version of him. El Cid, and also Thutmose. Okay, now you could pair Thutmose and El Cid until you get Esong, but you know I'm just assuming that you're not that spendy and you're not going to have that many skills on them. All right. Now, if you have Thutmose as the primary, let's talk about what the talents would be. We're talking about the archer and the support tree. Okay, so I can show. And by the way, the versatility tree has literally nothing of value. So you don't even need to think about the versatility tree. It is basically irrelevant in the current game state, okay? So for archer support, here's a commander that has those talents. This is what I would run right over here. Exactly this, all right? And you may be wondering, Chisgule, why only 2 points over here? You could put a third point, but remember how I talked about how rage works earlier? You're probably going to overrage. Overrage is not amazing. People have always had a weird headspace about how to think about rage. I think this is the build to run, all right? Just like that. If you're going to use Thutmose as the primary. Very powerful, all right? A lot of good skill damage mitigation here. I think that going for the damage from the archer tree is better than the AoE slow effect you can get from Cage of Thorns, all right? Now, if you're using Esong as the primary, at that point, we're talking about using the skill tree. So I really like this combination. This, by the way, works if you use your Hermann Prime as the primary. Or, Hermann Prime. Your Hermann as the primary, the Epic Hermann, okay? You get Feral Nature. You really want to get, I like, Phoenix-tailed arrows over here. Chance to get some good damage factor. If you prefer, honestly, this build's kind of interesting. The other route that I use this for Canyon. Okay. This build is good. Let me flip this around here. All right, I'll give you 2 options. I actually like this one over here. Let's push the rage generation. This is more designed for Sunset Canyon. I actually realize here I want this March Speed. March Speed's on the right side of the tree. You always want the speed. So let's just rename this to be more clear. Open field. I've built more talent trees. Honestly, I think actually, I don't know. Whatever. I don't need to pat myself on the back for how much my talent trees have been used and viewed. Let's take the normal attack damage enhancement and we can let's see here. We can get the attack or attack. Gosh, which one are we going to go for? It doesn't really matter which way you go. All right, there you go. All right, there you go. Now, you may be looking at this and wondering, wait, but Chisgule, like, what about latent power, bro? Okay, this is something that will definitely inevitably hit your radar. The reason you don't want latent power is this is damage over time effects. The wording over here has always kind of been confusing for a lot of people because there's so many different names for damage and things in this game. Read this as damage over time. So what is a damage over time effect? That is when, as an example, I'll show you an epic commander who is an honorable mention for the early game. But Kusunoki over here does this effect. Whenever a commander's troop launches a basic attack, it has a 10% chance to deal additional damage, 450 factor, to the target every second for 2 seconds. That damage over time is where you see things like latent power apply. Okay? So it's only to that, not typical damage factor. I guess he actually does a lot of damage over time here. Even his active skill does damage over time. So to use a better example, here's a commander that has no damage over time. Okay? It's just, boom, it just does the damage. All right, now, the other talent that I don't typically take, and I don't think is appropriate, until you get to the end game, and there are times, is this one over here, Naked Rage. You deal more skill damage, but take more skill damage of all types. Not amazing. Okay, better places for your talent points. All right, so for the open field, I actually prefer this build. This is more for Canyon. It has its perks with instant proc damage over here, which is also good for the field. But to miss out on this march speed, especially with an E-Song, would be a huge mistake. And the skill damage enhancement here is really serious. So yeah, we move in with the E-Song. All right, so you can use that build on your Hermann Prime as well, for what it's worth. Hermann Prime. Oh my God. Why do I keep saying that? Because in the end game, they re-released commanders as legendary. Okay. Having them at epic form contributes literally nothing to you getting them in legendary form. They just have the same name and look a little different. All right. But there's my confusion. Yep. The archer skill tree. He also has the garrison tree, but you know, this is not a garrisoning video. You can see, why am I showing you the build on E-Song? I could have just showed it to you over here. I had it all perfect. Actually not perfect. Why? No. I'd rather have the rage, actually. I don't know why I'm missing the 2 points over here. Made that build when I was a noob. Don't make my mistakes. Do what I say, not what I do. All right, now, the final pairing. What are you going to do? I got great news for you. We're talking about cavalry, okay? I just made a video talking about how Minamoto is an amazing pickup in the early game because he's powerful for PvP. And also, you're going to use him for Barb Forts as your #1 Barb Fort rally lead for the rest of time. Commander blindness is a real condition affecting real people. I found him eventually. Now, even if you spend a small amount of money on Minamoto to max the first skill, the damage factor you get from Minamoto is superior in the early game by such a large margin. Yeah, like, max him and use him in the early game is the cheapest legendary you can get your hands on, but it's still going to run you $200. And even if you don't max him, you can use him in the early game and then use something else later. The thing that I really like about using Minamoto in the early game is, again, not only will he be used for rallying Barb Forts, but also you can use him as one of your 2 commanders that you use in the end game, and you basically pair him with an end game commander when you get to that point until you have enough sculptures to replace him with something else. Because your bottleneck will be sculptures at the start. So we can honor that and work around it. And I think Minamoto is one way to do that. He's not meta in the end game like E-Song. E-Song is a meta choice in the end game. He is not. But he can tide you over. Now, who are we going to pair with him? One easy choice. It's Baibars. The thing that Baibars does that's so disgusting is what is not written here. What is not written here is what makes him so magical. You see, most commanders, when they do area of effect damage, which he does area of effect damage, 5 enemies, 1,000 factor. What he does not have written here is a damage reduction based on the number of targets that you hit. So I just finished showing you E-Song. His damage dealt is reduced for each target that you hit. That caps out at a maximum of 50%, so that when you go from 4 to 5 targets, it's a lot of upside. But anyways, area effect damage will be so busted if it just didn't take any reduction based on the number of targets hit. But hitting more targets is always more total damage. You always want to do this, okay? But there's no damage reduction. And that's not, the last I checked, just a mistake on the text. So this is disgusting, And all you need is the first skill maxed to start to capitalize. Ideally, you max the first 2 skills, Cav attack plus this. And then, you know, some things are going to land on the 4th, some are going to land on the 3rd. The 3rd skill is basically worthless to you. And getting the expertise is relevant because it's going to enhance your damage factor in an extremely meaningful way. Okay, in an extremely meaningful way. So you could use someone like Boudica as a tide over if you had them in a decent state from like your, you know, Barb stuff. There's other commanders you could use, okay, that are Cav commanders, and it would be okay. It would just be okay. All right. Yeah. So my recommendation is that Minamoto plus Baibars combination. Easy choice. Even if you do not use Minamoto, which I think you should, even if you spend a small amount of money to max the first couple skills, okay, or even just the first skill. The other options you have would, of course, be to use Belisarius as the secondary. You could use Boudica as the secondary. You could use Osman as the secondary. My worry for you is that we're sort of like reaching a point where it's like, bro, how many epic commanders can you really progress a meaningful amount? Pella as the secondary could work, although this rage generation often does literally nothing for you, which is kind of tragic. So something to keep in mind. Kind of depends on who you pair with and what talent tree. But I guess the other option that you could use, depending on your level of spend and depending on your level of progression with them, will be double C, right? Like, if you're a spender and you get the daily special offer for double C, Minamoto plus Cao Cao is going to be the jam, all right? And yes, that's how it's pronounced, right? No, maybe it's not the best pronunciation, but you know, I'm close enough. Double C. So everybody just calls him double C because nobody wants to pronounce anything, myself included, all right? He is a great secondary, no area of effect damage, but like, again, I don't know how many legendary commanders you can really count on having in a good, you know, space when you just start playing the game, obviously, okay? So you don't want to use him as the primary, though, because the mobility tree sucks for fighting other players. It sucks for rallying Barb Forts, too. It's just not, it's not where it's at, okay? So your talent options are actually pretty limited, because no matter what, you're going to use Cav skill, and the one and only talent tree to use for this, it's definitely not this, whatever this old style build was. Oh my God. It's this over here. All right, boom. There it is. Easy. This is it. Don't think, just do this. All right? Easy. Easy choices. Now, there is one other thing we do need to talk about. One other thing that we can talk about here. So you've got your infantry, you've got your archers, you've got a bunch of options for your cavalry. But one thing you can do is you can weave in, once you have them in a decent place, and you should weave them in, Ethelfled, okay? Freaking Ethelfled. She is a leadership commander. You're going to get her from Expedition. And what she's going to do for you is a bunch of damage factor that isn't reduced based off of the number of targets you're hitting. Ooh, and she does a big debuff. So you'll use Ethelfled as a secondary in any of the army configurations that we've talked about. You could use Sun Tzu with Ethelfled. You could use Minamoto with Ethelfled. You could use Hermann with Ethelfled. So you'll make your choice, depending on how your pulls are going, as to where you want to put her into your lineup. It's just going to take you some time in the early game doing the expedition to get the currency, to get enough sculptures to actually get somewhere meaningful with Ethelfled. In the end game, you know, look, I got 3.2 million this currency, and I don't have a good way to use it. So, yep. Let's jump back over here. I think we covered it. Let me just do one thing real quick, and let's jump into Expedition, and let's just go in here, and let me show you once again what we're doing for the build out, all right? So, in summary, my recommendation for the early game is going to be as follows, okay? Minamoto, easiest choice of your life, all right, if you're a spender. If you're not a spender, okay, you got options. Once again, commander blindness, I swear to you. It's a real condition affecting real governors. There's Mina. We talked about using, right over here, the buy bars. All right. We lock this in. All right. Boom. From there, for infantry, we talked about how you could use Pyrrhus with Sun Tzu. And I haven't leveled mine up because he never was really a relevant commander for me in the end game. He only was released to the game literally like 3 or 4 years, I think, maybe 5 years into the, state of the game. So by that point, he was really not relevant to me. But we pair with Sun Tzu. Okay. And there's infantry. You can't even see the Sun Tzu. Bro, Pyrrhus, get it under control, man. Quit bragging. Bro's literally got his arm in front of Sun Tzu's face. That is actually funny, and I never noticed that before. And then we're going to use Thutmose or Hermann, all right, until we get to Esong. So I think I would prefer Thutmose as the primary. The legendary commander as the primary makes you less of a target, generally speaking. So purely for avoiding getting targeted, I think that's a W of a choice, right? And here is that represented here. So this is what we're talking about doing in the early game, okay? And again, you're going to replace these commanders, Pyrrhus and Thutmose. So in my perfect world, you're not putting legendary commander sculptures in them, but I understand if you really kind of have to, depending on your sculpture velocity, to make it so that they're usable, okay? And usable is defined as kind of maxing that first skill, depending on how far in you get. I would say in general, just for context, that a 5-5-1-1 that's maxing the first 2 skills, and then the next 2 skills are at 1 point. 5-5-1-1 legendaries are equal or better to epics that are maxed. Okay, so a maxed out epic is about the same as a 5-5-1-1 legendary. And there's my recommendation. Now, like I said, you've got a lot of choices here, right? Like, if you wanted, let me show you, you could make the variant on the archers, which I think is very powerful, where you take the Hermann Prime and you go with the CID. I think Thutmose is generally the more powerful commander, but for a long time, I talked about how this combination with the CID secondary was really, really cool, okay, for its 3-second silence. Really powerful. And I also showed you how what you could do if you wanted was to move in on double C. And if you're doing the daily special offer, you probably will have a stronger double C. I assume he's still the daily special offer. Honestly, it's hard to keep up with the early game state here. But there you go. Like another kind of option there. So the more expensive option is this Mina double C Cav situation. Okay. The buy bars is a great option. And then also you've got the Ethelflaed you can swap in. Look at all these choices you have, man. Look at all these choices. So if you go Mina double C, and then you go Sun Tzu Ethel, and Thutmose with Hermann, I think that's reasonable. The other way to run it is you go Pyrrhus again with Sun Tzu, and you go Hermann with Ethel. That's reasonable to run. Until eventually you get the Esong, and the Esong is just your insta snap include replace in this pairing. All right. But Sun Tzu, you're going to get a ton of his sculptures from quests. All right. You enjoy the vid, throw a like on here, subscribe. I have so many videos designed to help you get value and smash your enemies. It has been the literal dedication of my life for the last 7 years. So I hope you'll subscribe and enjoy that content and enjoy those videos that will help make you a better player in the game. And I release tier lists every month where I talk about the literal best commanders. So if you're interested in that, subscribe. I stream my gameplay as well. So like you can actually see me fighting, win or lose. I am streaming. And so there's I don't know. I got 36 billion kill points almost. Like, yeah, I've seen a thing or two. I play in literally one of the actual strongest kingdoms in the game. All right. Enjoy the vid, throw a like on it, subscribe. Check the cards in the end screen for more new player guidance. Until next time, you have fun smashing your enemies. Take care, everybody.